Okay, looks like we are alive. Okay, we're gonna get started. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We are of the healthcare team from Stantec Architecture in California. We're going to discuss with you today how we can address the needs in behavioral health service through modular constructed facilities. Next, please. First, let me introduce the team. My name is Chu Foxlin, a design principal with more than 30 years experience in healthcare design. Maria Ionescu is our senior medical planner with vast experience in medical planning, both in the US and internationally. Nicole Atazi is our seasoned healthcare architect and project manager. Next, please. Let's start with why we are here. Maria.
Essentially to discuss what will come as no surprise to anybody, that there is a shortage of behavioral health services in the US. But perhaps what is surprising is the magnitude of that shortage. And if you just squint at this graph, the amount of orange will immediately tell you that half of the adults needing behavioral health services in the US are not receiving them. And this is according to the American Hospital Association data. Over the past 10 years, spending for behavioral health services has almost doubled, a trend that we expect to continue at an even more accelerated pace. We look at the number of beds per population, and over the last 20 years, the ratio of inpatient beds to population size has been steadily decreasing. If you consider 50 beds to 100,000 population to be a good goal, you see that 1995 we were close to 30, and right now we are barely at 17. This is California data, simply because we have focused our study in this market, but you will see very similar pictures in other states as well. So this is putting tremendous pressure on the entire system, but even more so, and what is often the point of entry, the first point of entry in the system, the emergency departments. Nowadays, 1 in 8 ED visits involves some form of behavioral health presentation. And over the last 10 years, that increase in volumes related to this patient population has been over 40%. So how have models of care evolved over time to address this? Historically, we started from where the patient would voluntarily present to the emergency department or would be taken to that emergency department, and there they would undergo medical clearance and a psychiatric assessment. If deemed a risk to themselves or others, they would follow the path of transfer to a higher acuity general acute care hospital or an acute psychiatric facility or some form of chemical dependency unit. These are California terms simply because our study is based there, but a similar picture would present elsewhere. It is in the early 80s that we've seen the sharpest drop in the number of beds. And that's where it was recognized at the time that about 70% of patients that really not need a long stay in inpatient care. So a different model was developed, that of a psychiatric health facility. It was created mainly to administrate what's called an involuntary maximum 72-hour hold that can be placed on a patient in crisis by either the paramedics or the ambulance, the police, or another type of licensed county professional. This is what is commonly known in California as a 5150 code, and you see that on the right-hand side in the darkest arrow. These are inpatient units. They are locked. they typically have maximum of 16 beds and with an average length of stay of about 3 days. And because they are different than hospitals in terms of licensing requirements and building code compliance requirements, I'll let Nicole elaborate a little bit on that.
Thanks, Maria. It's an interesting aspect about the psychiatric health facility that it's not regulated the same way hospitals are. In California, it's considered a residential inpatient facility and is licensed by the governing county. As Maria mentioned, it's also limited to a 16-bed maximum capacity. However, there are developments that create multiple psychiatric health facilities on the same site to get around the capacity limits.
There's a problem, and that is the problem of having to process this 5150 codes in the ED and having to immobilize either the paramedics or the police personnel in the ED while they're waiting for the medical clearance before transferring this patient to either psychiatric health facility or another type of inpatient environment. This is what is creating huge backlogs in EDs, and boarding times have been known to be sometimes over 24 hours for these patients. So it's in the early 90s that we're starting to see hospitals create separate but often connected outpatient facilities under the name Crisis Stabilization Units, or CSU in short, and that's what you see on the left in orange. This is 23-hour care, and admission is voluntary. The benefit to an ED flow from this comes from being able to transfer to a crisis stabilization unit all those patients that are waiting for referrals to community services, so they free up space in the ED. It is known that cost of care in CSU relative to an emergency department is about 60%, and also that the percentage of patients seen in a crisis stabilization unit that will go forward into an inpatient environment is small. That is only about 30% of these patients will get transferred to an inpatient environment. So that helps the ED. However, the 5150s still get processed there. So there needed to be another step, another way to address that. The newest model that we're seeing is that of a psychiatric emergency services unit. This one expands on the capability of a crisis stabilization by adding staff that is capable of processing 5150 codes, and adding the space where they can do that. This so far is the most effective way of diverting volumes from emergency departments, and it's shown to be particularly effective when deployed regionally. When one such psychiatric emergency services unit acts in conjunction with several emergency departments as a system, it's an approach that we'll see in a minute. Nicole, if you elaborate a little bit on the code and licensing for these.
Thanks, Maria. Yes, since the Crisis Stabilization Unit and the Psychiatric Emergency Services are ambulatory outpatient services, they fall under a medical office designation. So they are typically licensed through the affiliated hospital, but they're reviewed by the local jurisdictions. They're a lot easier to implement.
So if we look at the continuum of care, it's not just inpatient beds that we're missing in the continuum of care. It's in this transitional area between less intensive care and more intensive care that we see the biggest gaps. It's crisis residential treatment, it's day treatment, it's partial hospitalization services that we are missing. This is coming from a study in Mendocino County in California. However, similarities exist with other jurisdictions. Just to get a mental map of what is the penetration of some of these services in the territory in California, this is where in the darker colors you see the 18 counties that offer psychiatric health facility services, so that 3-day short inpatient stay. The rest of the state does not offer that. the newest model, the psychiatric emergency services, is seen only in and around San Francisco and the Bay Area and in and around Los Angeles. The rest of the state does not have this. And it's one of these Bay Area counties, Alameda, that is running one of the more successful models, one of these regional ones, and I'll speak a little bit more about that in a second. It follows from, to summarize at this point, the impacts are not limited just on emergency departments alone, but also in a region in the way the ambulance service works, in the way that the law enforcement operates. So it follows from there that the positive benefits of introducing a psychiatric emergency services model would extend beyond the hospital alone to the larger community. The chart on the left here shows you a little bit what studies, whether nationally or California-centric, are showing about the boarding time. Average boarding time for one such patient is anywhere between 4 and just over 10 hours. On the right-hand side, it's showing you what happens when a psychiatric emergency services model is deployed in conjunction with several EDs in one region. It's being able to absorb not just their patients in crisis, but also their 5150 calls. So that boarding time can reduce to just under 2 hours. So the difference, those almost 8 hours of productive time reflect upon not just the emergency department staff, but also ambulance paramedics and police services as well in the community. So the benefit far extends beyond the walls of the hospital alone.
So here we put together a comparison chart of the various models of care to understand the differences and see them side by side. This matrix goes through the different jurisdictions and licensing agencies, approximate sizes, staff requirements, and the average reimbursement rates. Some models of care have multiple names as well. A psychiatric emergency services is also known as a mental health or behavioral health urgent care, and the crisis stabilization unit can be known as an intake stabilization unit or evaluation and treatment services. Next. Taking a deeper dive into the crisis stabilization unit, the psychiatric emergency services, and the psychiatric health facility, we generated a 16-bed or 16-patient space program and found that in comparison, the crisis stabilization unit and psychiatric emergency services are 40% and 50% the size of a psychiatric health facility. It's the same number of patients, but serves a much smaller footprint. Next. And so part of our understanding of the behavioral health crisis is recognizing the financial impact. In 2018, Kemper Consulting Group completed a study for the Mendocino County, California. It's centered around a gap analysis for the behavioral health system. And as part of the study, they identified 3 counties in the state that operate a 4-bed crisis stabilization unit as a financial case study. They looked at Nevada County, Napa County, and San Luis Obispo County. The average operating costs were between $1.38 to $1.6 million annually, and they operated at a revenue loss of $450,000 a year. Next. However, to understand the full benefit of a crisis stabilization unit, you need to look further than the intrinsic cost. In the same study, the Kemper Consulting Group recommended the implementation of a crisis stabilization unit for Mendocino County because it would provide a centralized assessment and clinical operation that relieves local hospitals and local law enforcement with a place where observation, assessment, and safe handoff can occur. Next. And by diverting 4 patients out of an emergency department, it opens up 4 beds for other patients. Being conservative and taking into account that there wouldn't be 100% diversion from the emergency department, we estimate a revenue opportunity at approximately $2 to $3 million a year. This estimation is based on the average daily reimbursement rate, multiplying that by 4 patients for the duration of a year, and then just applying a conservative reduction. Next. You're on mute too.
Now we illustrate the dire needs and the huge gap in our behavioral health services. what can we do as architects and designers? We at Stantec, interior and exterior healthcare group, we come up with this solution. Next, please. We can design a kit of parts. Those parts need to be modularly constructed and manufactured. They will meet the client program needs and can be easily transported. The key word here is easily, because a good chunk of modular construction cost lies in the transport of those modules from factory to site. On the screen, we illustrated the components for the basic crisis stabilization unit that Maria and Nicole had talked about so much in the previous slides. So those, on the upper right-hand corner are the two support modules. And then the one in the middle, towards the bottom, is the patient lounge module that will provide space for 8 patient chairs. And then on the left, upper left-hand corner, what we show here is a type of module that is for single occupancy patient rooms. Thus, by adding this module, we can easily upgrade the entire facility from a crisis stabilization unit into a psychiatric emergency service facility. Now, each of those modules has all the interior components: walls, doors, windows, floors, ceiling, and roof structure. MEP, low voltage, audio-visual, medical alarms are also integrally built in each module and ready to be hooked up on site. Next, please. While these modules are manufactured and fabricated in the factory shop, which takes about 8 to 10 weeks, the site is simultaneously being prepared to receive the modules, demolition, site utility, building foundations, etc., thus significantly reduce the construction duration. Next, please. The fabricated modules are then transported to the site by flatbed trucks. For this reason, the modules must be designed to take into account the size of the trucks, the roads used from the factory shop to the site, and local regulations on oversized transport. In most states, the modules that we're talking about here will require police escort for transport. The actual assembly time for on site for all these modules actually are amazingly short. For 5 modules that we have shown here, the assembly time could be as short as 1 to 2 days. Now, there are always elements that have to be constructed on site. Anything that you want to be seamless, such as the final roofing components like curtain walls, glass storefront, or canopy. The elements that's difficult to transport without damage. The construction time, therefore, will be impacted depending on how many such elements you have in the design. Next, please. Once we have the kit of parts, we can either right size for the client on day one or add on as needed, as you see on the screen. In other words, the facility can grow as needed. These modules are put together to form a network of interior and exterior spaces. Corridors are connected, and they provide smooth connection to all the functions throughout the space. And the MEP structure here, it's important to note that can also be designed and standardized so that extra capacity can be added modularly later on. Now, I will ask Maria to walk you through exactly what's in each module.
So at the very basic level, this kit of parts starts with just either 4 or 8 chair accommodation for patients. That would be the darker blue module on the south. And support spaces. So the orange and blue on the right, logistics and clinical support for patient care. This can grow organically to a 16-chair capacity, adding a module at the north. And at any point in time, this can transform from a crisis stabilization unit alone, so just chair accommodation, to a psychiatric emergency services capability by adding what we call a seclusion module or a PES module, the one on the left in the lighter blue, that contains the ability to have a dedicated ambulance drop-off, some exam and assessment space, some quiet space, some seclusion space. All of this is centered around a courtyard, which is seen as a focal element, a space for reflection and connection with nature. But the most important thing here is that this can grow organically. It can start small. Many facilities only start with a component of 4 to 8 chairs and grow organically as needs evolve over time.
Thank you, Maria. Same approach can be applied, as you see on the screen, to create psychiatric health facility, the kind with single occupancy patient rooms for overnight stay. Now, the one we saw before, those crisis stabilization, even with the psychiatric emergency service, all this stay will be under 23 hours. So this is the kind that will allow you to have overnight stay. And over here, we have basically 3 kinds of modules. The dark blue one is the patient room module that has 2 patient rooms and its own private bathrooms. Both are single occupancy. And then the medium blue, I should say, is the 2 kinds of support modules. Again, all this can be modified and designed based on the need of the owner. And then the lightest color is the activity modules. Dining or day activity, large lounge for meetings and activity. Also, these are the modules in light blue that you can see. Then 2 of them are adjacent to the courtyard to take advantage of the natural light. And again, Maria can walk you through the details of each module.
This is a little bit more detail provided, but as Chu was saying, starting from the lower right-hand corner, that's the arrival point, and that links immediately to what we call a day zone. All the day activities, group therapy, dining, multi-purpose rooms are in this zone. Beyond that, the L shape on the north and west, containing the private bedrooms with 3 points of supervision at ends of corridors, also with connection to views to the outdoors and access to the courtyard at the inflection point. The south side divided between logistics and the ability to provide this more secluded zone where you can have seclusion room, quiet room, and the ability to have, very similar to what we saw before, dedicated ambulance drop-off point.
I actually can go back to that slide again, Maria. I just want to point out one thing, that in this particular layout, what we had tried is to actually limit the modular constructions only to the rooms. And the corridor, other corridors that connecting different modules, as well as the entry, were actually built on site. And, this is, by that recommendation of the manufacturer that we've been working with. Next, please. Now, just because it's modular construction, it doesn't mean that we have to sacrifice the look, sacrifice the design. It's all about how we create a optimum patient experience. We don't want, the patients coming to this facility thinking that, it's a second-class facility. So, with the modular construction, there is limitation for sure, but simple facade treatments such as metal screens that you see in the light brown color in the perspective, that can be a brighter color, or it could be a perforated metal screen that creates a certain pattern. They can be added in front of those punch windows that came with the modular construction, allowing the daylight to go through, but provide privacy that's very much needed for the type of patients we have in this kind of facility. In addition, canopy and glass curtain wall or glass curtain glass storefront for the entry area and the reception area would also dramatically improve the exterior. Next, please. The interior as well. We can have a glass wall, floor to ceiling, facing the courtyard to allow ample daylight and the view into the nature. And remember, because the exterior courtyard is actually created by all the modules, all on all four sides, so that courtyard is actually enclosed in the sense that the access is controlled and the activity can be easily monitored by the nurse stations from inside. So it becomes a safe environment for and this actual extended space for a patient to move about. Together with very thoughtfully selected interior finishes and furnishing, lighting, like you see on the screen. Together with all these elements, we can then create a very calm and pleasant patient environment. Next, please. So, in summary, the modular construction solution that we offer here has four really big advantages. First, and the biggest advantage, is that it saves construction time. And time is money. Plus, the nature of standard module is that the larger the scale, the more duplicated elements that you have, the more money we save. In addition, the modular fabrication cost is not controlled by the prevailing wages of the region of the project site. So there's savings if the project site is a geographic area with pretty expensive labor rate, like San Francisco Bay Area or Los Angeles metropolitan areas. So it's no wonder that what we see currently, the modular construction projects happen in those more expensive large city areas. So the third advantage is that as we illustrated in the previous slides, it allows the facility to grow over time, or you can have it right-sized with all the standard components on day one. Lastly, the modular facility can be a turnkey contract so that at the end of the lease, the client can effectively turn the facility back to the developer and thereby tremendously limit the owner's financial exposure. Next, please. So with that, we conclude our presentation part. I see we only used half of the time that we're allotted to, but we would love to hear your comments and thoughts. And if you have any questions, we would love to answer them. And I see that there are some coming through. Nicole, if you could, help us organize them and review them, and we will try to answer all your questions.
Sure. So there was one question that might have been answered, but I will present it to you as well. It says, your program mentions chairs instead of or in addition to beds. Can you elaborate? So Maria, can you field this one?
What we see For crisis stabilization, it's mostly some type of lounge chair accommodation. Sometimes, because it's not a uniform picture and different facilities have deployed these in different ways, we also see a combination of chair accommodation in either pods or one larger space, as we were trying to show here, and some type of four-walled, quieter environments. It really depends on the type of patient population that presents and what's the ratio between those that really utilize these facilities as a daytime versus how many are acute enough that they may be required spending overnight or spending time in a more a private environment. So it's not a given. It really depends on the facility and the patient population they serve.
We have another question here. It says, what is the patient acuity level that we designed for?
What we are seeing from studies is that mostly the patients that get referred to the crisis stabilization units, the biggest number of presentations is suicidal ideation. This is the type of presentation that takes up the most volume. This is lower acuity. 70% of those that go in crisis stabilization units do not need to proceed to some type of inpatient environment. They just need support, immediate support. So those first 23 hours are critical. And then they also need referral to follow up community services. That's usually where the link breaks down. That's where repeat readmission happens, because maybe those community services are not there. Maybe the referral doesn't work as it should. So that's where the continuum needs to be present, where we need services to cover that whole gamut. So we're not talking highest acuity. Again, 70% of these patients will do well if supported appropriately in the community with outpatient services following one presentation at the emergency department or at a crisis stabilization unit.
Thanks, Maria. Our third question here is, what is the estimated time and cost savings compared to standard construction? Chu, can you fill this one?
Okay, I'll try. Well, as we mentioned, the module fabrication itself it's only about 8 to 10 weeks. But before that, I guess you're asking, is it just the construction time, or the design time? It's separate. You either design for stick and build construction, or you design for modular. So if you just talk about the construction time, the fabrication time itself, that just says 12 weeks, 3 months. And then you have no more than 1 week to assemble and do the on-site, and as I mentioned, depends on how many those special elements that has to be built on site. The construction time could be, again, 2-3 weeks added because of all those special elements. So that gives you only about 4 months total. So we're estimating that compared to a traditional stick built construction, we're talking about at least 40% saving in the construction time. And the cost, it's interesting that it's a very different way of calculating the cost. If you're just purely looking at the material and labor, the steel framed modular construction come almost the same as a steel frame stick built. or actually, concrete structure stick-built construction. But you have to take into account that the construction time is shorter, the wages for the fabrication piece could be lower, so that itself, in the end, comes out as a lower cost. You could calculate that way. So we don't really have a lot of data at this point to go by, but we think mostly the saving will come from that, the shortage, the reduced time of construction time, that 40% that we're just talking about.
Thank you, Chu.
Yep.
So fourth question has come in. It is, what is the warranty on a PES unit? And maybe this is something that I can field, because a warranty would be especially from the manufacturer who would do it. And but we are seeing that modular construction can have like a 30-year life, and as well as that they can then be repurposed and then recycled as well. We haven't worked with a specific manufacturer. We are really designing more performance specifications for layout of these modules, and that will allow the ability to then go to market to multiple manufacturers to get the best price.
I also wanted to point out that it depends on how the contract is formulated. If we're talking about a turnkey lease contract, then the liability on the owner part is further reduced by the fact that you're really merely leasing the facility. So you have this sort of one point of responsibility source to go to if anything goes wrong. So that's why we think the modular construction brings in this additional advantage that allow you to actually turn the facility back to the owner at the end of the lease. And, from sustainability standpoint, it's also good that those modular constructions, once turned back, finish their useful life with one owner, could potentially be used by others. You either use as the same kind of facility for a different owner, or you can downcycle the facility to either office or, so, 70 to 80% of the modular construction can be recycled. So, we think that's a great add also from environment and sustainability standpoint.
Thanks, Joe. We have another question that came in. Is, have there been any studies looking into multiple story modules? Maria, do you want to put this one?
Yeah, definitely. We, at least one of the manufacturers we've been studying this type of solution with, offered multi-story capability. And we have seen them develop as multi-stories. We've seen in California one such deployment where a crisis stabilization unit is a two-story hybrid, so semi-modular. Half of it is modular, half of it is customized. 8 chairs on the first floor and another unit of 8 on the second. So it's possible, still using modular construction and still working with the same array of manufacturers.
And I want to add that from constructability standpoint, multiple levels modular construction most certainly is possible. And although most of the time we see 2 to 3 levels, and 5 levels are really pushing it. And of course, you will have added cost relating to all the dealing with all the vertical transportation, so stairs and elevators, and in this case, hospital-sized elevators. So for that reason, what we have seen thus far is mostly one-story construction for this type. I think I don't see any other questions coming up. We can we can relay to you some of the information that we got when we were doing other presentations. Some people ask the limitations that modular construction have, and we asked us what are the limitations. We think actually after working with different type of facilities and lay them out, we actually found it's actually very flexible in the sense that allowing us to create different spaces. So like I mentioned, the size limitation really comes from the size of the flatbed truck and how each state and jurisdiction allow the oversized transport. So so long we stick to something like 12 feet by say 40, 50 feet module, we can almost have that done anywhere in this country. So when you get to say 14 feet, 16 feet is really the max in width, and then the length to be beyond 60 feet that's when it becomes really problematic. So long we stick to a reasonable size, it really is pretty good to cover all the functions that we need. Most of the rooms in the kind of facility we just talked about are not big. They can't fit in the 12 feet, 14 feet span. And then larger rooms like dining or multifunction rooms, we may just have one row of columns in the middle. Then we can still be able to have open rooms like that. So from size limitation standpoint, it's very workable, and city height wise, it can go as high as 16 feet to the outer edge of the box. And if you think interior space being 9 feet and give 5 feet overhead in the ceiling, and you get 14 feet box, that's well within the limit for most of the roads. So it's been really a eye opener for us designers as well. The fact that we can really work with this kind of limitation for just about all the types of behavioral health facilities that we need to generate. So if there are no other questions, we really thank you for joining us today. We can conclude our session and give extra 15 minutes back to your day. Emails is of our work emails are on the screen. So feel free to contact us. And thanks again for joining us. Enjoy the rest of the conference.